Well, happy Friday. The search for Norwich's new man continues over 3 weeks now since Johannes departed the football club. We still sort of await to find out who it's going to be. There's been a few sort of inclinations and rumours this week that we're going to try and unpack over the sort of course of the next 45 minutes or so. Of course, we want your comments and various sort of names that are in the frame. Would you like certain people? We'd be intrigued to read those over the course of the show. Adam joined by Connor and Paddy. Paddy, first and foremost, before we maybe talk about those names and who's maybe been put in the frame, sort of, have you got sort of any sort of update on maybe where we are in that search and sort of the timeline of events? Because clearly, the fans have been not impatient, but there is certainly a feeling that there's sort of been a bit of a long old search so far since that news about Johannes.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me, Adam. Yeah, I've come down into the city. That's the worst backdrop ever, the old scaffolding. But I'm in the forum. If anybody's seen the forum, it's getting a bit of a, I don't know, like lick of paint or something. But so yeah, I should have thought about the backdrop. But getting a bit impatient with us as well. I see we're getting quite a lot of uncalled for scrutiny. I'm not sure what that's about. There's some serious clowns out on that social media platform this week. That's all I'm going to say. We'll leave it there. But the reality is, as of this morning, still quite a long way to go in this process. Intimated to me, it could be another week away yet before the white smoke or the corner flag, as I've just tweeted, is appearing. So, ergo, if there's another week or so left, minimum, that tells you we're not in any end game. There's no shortlisted interview stage. Yes, people are being spoken to. But again, as it's been explained to me, the nature of this is you have a filtering process, then you go maybe first interview, second interview, maybe even a third interview. There's obviously a lot of stakeholders who have to be involved. They might not necessarily be in at the initial exploratory conversation stages. Some of that will happen remotely over Zoom or what have you. Some of it will be face-to-face. So a lot of moving parts. What there certainly isn't is 3 names that have been put out there earlier in the week, and that is the 3-name shortlist. That is not the case at all. They are part of a wider search that is ongoing and is still ongoing and includes in-work, out-work, domestic, overseas. Coaches are still in their seasons, is what is explained to me. So, again, those points we put out liberally. Whether you choose to believe them or not, that's up to you. Not bothered, if I'm honest. But that is the state of play. And obviously where we're at now, and I think this probably taps into it, is it's a very febrile part of the cycle. The old manager's gone nearly a month ago now. There's no sign at the moment of a new incoming replacement. And, of course, in that space there's a lot of conjecture and a lot of names getting thrown about and a lot of, we want some names is all you heard this week, up until this week. Then the 3 names get put out there. Well, we don't like them. Their style of play is so far removed from what Ben Knapper, most recently in our touch point, had explained that is still going to be the case. And that's actually been noted inside the club, that those 3 individuals, if you zoom out, you might reasonably argue, well, they don't play Johannes off-ball style football. But don't get carried away, as I say, with the idea that they are the only 3 names on a short list. And as a result, they're not looking at anybody else. That is so far removed from the case. And I think it's safe to assume of those 3 names, there's probably only one at this stage. In that, for me, would be Lijnders, who maybe is one of those that might go forward later in the process. I mean, JP in the Telegraph earlier in the week more or less said that Steve Cooper, he didn't feel he was in the running. That would appear to be the case. And as for Gary O'Neill, well, as we've seen, and this might frame a lot of this conversation today, there's so many other potential jobs flying about in the Championship that a lot of the same characters are getting touted for and linked with, and I'm sure being spoken to. So the sense would be around Gary O'Neill at this stage that while he's maybe one they have approached and had a chat to, maybe he's just seeing what's out there and maybe assessing his options. I don't think that is something that is moving down a path to an end game with Gary O'Neill. So, yeah. Unfortunately, Norwich, as we sit here, do not have a head coach candidate identified, signed, sealed, delivered. So as a result, we cannot bring you that news. But that isn't to say that there's plenty going on in the background and continues to go on. And just to reiterate, possibly another week yet to go in this, and all bets are in play in terms of destinations. We've seen, again, TalkSport mentioning Liam Manning. We'll get into him. there's a candidate who is in work, season has just come to a conclusion, would they look at him? Would he be one that would tick many of the boxes if you're Ben Knapper and you're drawing up with Neil Adams and the data analysts at Colney? Potential candidates? Of course he would. Goes without saying. So, that's why this is such a fluid situation. And the reality is, it's still some way to go. And as a result, we can't sit here and bring any news that is Norwich closing in on, because that's not where they're at. They are still, albeit now it's starting to accelerate a little bit, that they're talking to candidates, but there's still plenty of sifting. There's still plenty of conversations going on with various parties, and just bear that in mind is all I would say at this stage when we're, debating who could come in and replace Johannes Hoff Thorup. But yeah, so that's as latest as we could provide. It's from only an hour or so ago. So yeah, sorry to disappoint those who were in the Russell Martin camp. We brought you that news. He is definitely not in the running, never was in the running, hasn't been spoken to. I'm sorry if that offended the Russell Martin supporters who were crying into their cornflakes when we delivered that news on Wednesday morning. But that was the situation, and always has been the situation. So Russell Martin is not a candidate, never has been. And I don't know why it takes a national journalist to report the same thing 12 hours later before certain elements on social media decide that is the case. We told you first, and we will endeavour to, when we can separate out the actual facts of the matter from a process, then we will always endeavour to do that. So if you don't wish to consume our content, then sadly, then we'll you're entitled to go elsewhere. But I would advise the majority of Norwich fans to probably stay on our channels, because you're more likely to hear it from us than elsewhere. But we live in a free world. That's my rant over. I'm getting off my soapbox, and we're passing it back to you, Adam.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, you mentioned the three candidates that were put in the frame earlier this week by John Percy of the Telegraph, Gary O'Neill, Steve Cooper, maybe less so, Pep Lijnders. Connor, what do you sort of make of those profiles? Paddy sort of alluded to it a little bit there. Obviously, clearly all worked in England, domestically, some in the Championship, some not. Some all different backgrounds, all different routes into sort of management. Pep Lijnders more as an assistant under Klopp, but spells overseas that haven't worked. So what do you sort of make of that, and maybe those names in the frame thus far?
Yeah, before that, just to follow on with what Paddy said, because I know people, we come on here and obviously do these lives a lot, and people ask us questions. So just to make one thing abundantly clear, which maybe has got a little bit lost, when you ask me questions like this, Adam, and I think you did last week, and I preempted it with the view that we sometimes say things that are opinion based and are not based on any kind of knowledge, and when we say that, we very clearly present that to be the case. So when we spoke on the podcast about Jack Wilshere, we had a debate and gave our views on it. That wasn't based on a state of knowledge at that stage. And likewise, this conversation, Paddy's mapped out where it is, and now a lot of what we will say will be opinion led. So just to make that abundantly clear for anyone maybe who struggles with that differentiation, there it is, and hopefully that's clear. These guys, yeah, it's an interesting one. I think they're interesting candidates. You look at all of them in their own right, and I think as Paddy says, it's clear to me that what you've got at the moment is, I almost think of it as like a funnel, a managerial, a process to find a managerial process. You start really wide, you put a net out and basically try and catch candidates who maybe cover all bases, all different style of plays, all different philosophies, maybe some of those guys that are closer to where in your head you are thinking, and maybe some guys who aren't, whose style of play isn't but necessarily what you would go for, maybe don't have the youth record, but maybe have done other things that are quite impressive in the game because you want to hear what their view is, and maybe get some input from those guys. And you speak to all of those people, and then you have a second round of process where you speak to more people, speak to those that you did like, and you speak to them again, and then you filter it all the way through until at the end you get somebody who obviously is that ideal candidate who ticks a lot of who ticks a lot of boxes. So yeah, I think what we're seeing for this process, because as Paddy mentioned, those are free candidates. I wrote a piece on Gary O'Neill this morning that you can go and watch at go and read at pinkin.com. That is kind of opinion based. Sorry about that again. But I think him, for example, is an example of this process, because certainly style of play point, based on what he's done at Wolves and Bournemouth, you wouldn't say that aligns with what we would associate with Norwich City, particularly under Ben Knapper and what he outlined his style of play was. There isn't really that youth development aspect, but equally, there were some good things in those spells. From a counter-attacking perspective, they were really good. And actually, I remember speaking to someone earlier this year who kind of said, actually, when Norwich have looked at their most dangerous, it's almost been in kind of those transitional esque moments. So you can kind of see maybe why they'd want to have a conversation with him. And equally that Monday night football clip that I know has gone around, which is him speaking about his pragmatism and adaptation, which is fine, but equally his team's conceded a lot of goals and 20 goals from set pieces, I think. So I would maybe dispute that a little bit. That being said, there is obviously context. The jobs he took were very difficult. At Wolves, all of their best players were sold in his first window. He did an unbelievable job, I think, to keep them in the Premier League in that background. Didn't quite go as well this season. And at Bournemouth as well, inherited that after a 9-0 defeat 4 games into the season from Scott Parker. It was his first managerial job. I think there is a lot there to like with Gary O'Neill. Is he somebody that I look at and go, yep, I think he ticks all the boxes for Norwich City? To be honest, no. I think there is a risk there. We haven't seen him. Hopefully I'm back. But yeah, we haven't seen him build a team that is, capable of having lots of the ball and breaking down low blocks. We just haven't and don't see that from him yet. Doesn't mean he can't do it. Just haven't seen it. So I think that would be a risk. Pep Lijnders, again, you kind of look at the criteria. The criteria I've sort of attached to it, and Paddy can and you, Adam, as well, can maybe chip in with other aspects. It feels to me like it's got to be someone who plays a similar, not completely the same, but similar fundamentals to what we saw Johannes Hoff Thorup try and implement in terms of that style of play. Someone who's really good at developing young players, and someone obviously who, as we've mentioned, has a bit of managerial experience, because that's the reason Jack Wilshere got ruled out. Well, Pep Lijnders does all 3 of those things. I mean, I watched an interview of him this morning, and he speaks about the autonomy that Klopp gave him to go and lead training sessions and tactics at Liverpool. And, you look at someone like Trent Alexander-Arnold, who he had in the academy and helped progress all the way through, and there are others as well. He's clearly got that player development point, style of play. I think at RB Salzburg, he's clearly a lot more of kind of a gegenpress sort of pressing type of guy. But actually the work he did at Salzburg was a lot more possession based, because they are so dominant in their league that they are going to have a lot of the ball. And so it was about trying to implement some of those type of processes. Didn't go that well. And again, you speak about all of these candidates, there are red flags, there are elements maybe that don't quite suit with him. It's the fact that in both managerial jobs he's had so far, he hasn't lasted more than 30 games in either of them, I don't think. So yeah, again, that would go against him, but I think there are some good points to him. So again, within this process, you look at all of those people who maybe tick 1 box, tick 2 boxes, some who tick 3, you put them all together in that initial stage, you speak to as many as you can, and then you begin to filter, and that feels like where we are. So yeah, I think with all of those candidates, Steve Cooper as well, I know, and sort of our understanding as well is that feels quite unlikely. I think he probably sees himself at maybe a higher stage as to where Norwich City are at the moment. They finished 13th in the Championship. He was managing in the Premier League. That's fair enough. But yeah, I would maybe again, youth development wise, you could argue absolutely, but style of play wise, I would argue against. So lots of pros and cons to each of those 3 names. But as Paddy mentioned, they aren't the only 3 names. They haven't been the only 3 names at any stage. And yeah, I think we've said that pretty consistently all the way through. So yeah, it's still at a stage where they're speaking, they're information gathering, and they're filtering down. And that is a good thing. I know time and patience is in short supply in football at the best of times, but I'd run a parallel almost with the Sunderland process last year, where they took so long, there were so many names in the frame, and it ended up being somebody from France who nobody had been speaking about. And actually, you look at the job that Reggie Lebris has done there this season, it's been unbelievable to get them into the playoffs and now into the playoffs.
Let's gloss over that one, Connor. Let's gloss over.
Oh yeah, sorry, I did forget about that. But that they took their time, and if taking the time means you come out with a candidate who's the right candidate, then I'd much rather they took that time rather than maybe hire somebody in the next 2 to 3 days that isn't the correct fit. So yeah, and as Paddy said, there'll be people who are in work, there'll be people who are in work but on holiday, there'll be people who are in work and haven't finished their seasons. There's so many different dynamics to consider here as to why this process is maybe going to bleed into its 4th week. And I'm personally okay with that. Obviously it's up to everyone else, but it's about finding the right person, not the quickest person, in my view.
Yeah, indeed. What do you make, I suppose, of the fact that the sort of 3 names that were out there, Paddy, are all out of work? Obviously, clearly, as you've outlined, there's going to be managers in work that will probably come to the frame and at some point, and maybe currently in a job. Liam Manning may be one of those that we'll delve into very shortly. But quite intriguing, I suppose, that given the length of time it's taken from Johannes, being relieved of his duties to 3 weeks on, and we finally get 3 names and they're all out of work.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious why the out of work ones have maybe surfaced is, as we all know and can understand, that hypothetically a manager who's in work, then they're under contract. You can't just pick the phone up to them. We won't get into the weeds of third parties maybe in and around, which I'm sure goes on. But there is a formal process, in terms of approaching club to club to get permission to. So that for me is why none of the in-work people in this process that they wish to either approach or have approached have come to light, because the reality is, if you're approaching people who are in work and that doesn't pan out, you don't want, whether you're the approaching club or the club who that coach is currently at, that to really come out, because it's not a good look either way, is it? So for either set of fan bases or either set of clubs. So that to me is the obvious one. Why maybe it's the out of work ones where that isn't a factor. And that's maybe where there was a bit of frustration around Russell Martin, because quite understandably there's a coach who's out of work, who, even parking the Norwich City dimension, has got a team out of the Championship, has got style of football and a clear identity, maybe too much in its purest form for his detractors, given how it ended at Southampton in the Premier League, but mightily effective in getting that team out of the Championship 2 seasons ago now. So that's maybe where there was a little bit of surprise, genuine surprise, that Russell wasn't approached. But ultimately it's Ben Knapper driving this process. It's not Russell Martin or anybody else, and I think that's probably why. I think it's why now. Who knows? Who knows the motivations there? There's lots of. To go back to my previous point, there's 6, maybe more jobs coming available now in the Championship, or potentially could do. Hull being the most recent one in the last 24, 48 hours. That's a lot of out-of-work managers. That's a lot of agents around those out-of-work managers. That's a lot of speculation and kite flying and projecting a client into positions. So all of that comes into play, I'm sure. But I think the top and bottom of it is I'd be very surprised if you see anything until towards the end game process of managers who are in work, their names getting put out there, for that reason, that it's in both parties' interests to keep those ones under wraps, because there's a confidentiality to approaching somebody who's already in work, isn't there?
There is indeed, yeah. I suppose one that maybe is in work that's maybe surfaced over recent weeks, maybe less so from reports, but more just people throwing his name in the mix. A man that maybe knows Norwich, having lived here previously in a younger life. Liam Manning, Bristol City, of course, now out of the playoffs after their defeat to Sheffield United over 2 legs quite heavily. What do you make of that one, Connor? Evidently, a manager with Championship experience, done a pretty good job at Oxford, then went to Bristol and has transformed a team that probably shouldn't be in the playoffs to be in the mix. So what do you make of that name and him as a profile?
Yeah, really interesting one, isn't it? I think it's hard to look, particularly if you look into domestic and coaches in the Championship, and those are obviously the parameters that all of us are most familiar with. Then I think Liam Manning would be towards the top of your list. I think we do need to clarify one thing on him, though, which is he's definitely not a Norwich City fan. I've been in the room when he made that point. In fact, I think not that I can speak for Liam Manning, it's up to him to speak for himself, but I think he's probably a little bit more blue and white than yellow and green if we were going to press it. But I don't know if he's an Ipswich fan, but obviously he was on their books for a period of time and coached there as well. But yeah, from Norwich, was a season ticket holder, but definitely not a Norwich fan was the message from him. So there'll be no sort of emotional reasoning behind that. I really like the job, not just that he's done at Bristol, but that he's done throughout his career. I think you look at what he did at MK Dons, went in after Russ actually, and took that team and made it into a credible League One contender. Didn't quite make it. They finished third. The next season was a little bit difficult, and ultimately he was sacked there. The job he did at Oxford, he laid a lot of the groundwork for Des Buckingham to take on to get that team out of League One. And again, you look at the job that he's done at Bristol City, I would say he's got that team punching well above their weight in terms of what they've achieved this season. They've used the fewest players in the Championship. A lot of those players have had to really go to the mill in terms of how much they've played and the load that they've played. And done it with obviously a good style of play and some young players along the way, and obviously was at one stage part of the City football group. So that is a really good coaching CV that I think he's built up for himself. Clearly, there are Norfolk connections, be it he is or isn't a Norwich fan, he definitely isn't, then that I'm sure would appeal to him as well. That being said, I'm sure equally there's probably an element to him that would like to continue to progress at Bristol City. Obviously, I know lots of people jumped on this, the noises that he made post, I think it was the first leg, wasn't it, of the playoff semi-final, and that's been sort of reiterated by the owner again post-season, that there aren't going to be sort of major shifts in budget. So you'd think Norwich would be an attractive proposition on those kind of things. But again, I think there are elements where he maybe doesn't completely align with what we would think about with Norwich City. I think his style of play, particularly this year, not historically, but this year has been quite adaptable. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but it depends how Ben Knapper wants to view it and whether he decides that he wants someone maybe that is quite as ideological as Johannes Hoff Thorup was, albeit he kind of shifted towards the end of his tenure. But yeah, I think of the domestic candidates, I think it's hard to look at Liam Manning and not see real strengths and real pluses to kind of why that would be a good fit. And it's one of those where it kind of feels like it would be a good fit as well. And again, that's not to say that Norwich City that he's an option or that he isn't an option. It's just my view on it. And I think, could they do a lot worse than him? I think they probably could, particularly domestically. And again, we speak about maybe coaches that are on an upward trajectory. He's definitely one that feels like he is. And certainly if he could replicate some of that work that he did at Bristol City. I actually remember them coming to Carrow Road. I think it was the end of last season, wasn't it, Adam? I think we were both at that game and they were really impressive the way they played. And it was them and Swansea under Luke Williams that you were kind of looking at and you think, wow, yeah, if they could get it right this season, they could maybe have a real go. And obviously, he's taken it on. Luke Williams maybe didn't at Swansea, albeit there was a lot of conjecture with the West Brom job and stuff that kind of derailed that. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to like about Liam Manning, builder, player, developer, sort of quite progressive in his outlook. Norfolk links, yeah, that would all all make sense.
Indeed, yeah. What would you sort of make of the Liam Manning link, Paddy? Clearly, obviously, Connor's outlined quite a bit of it there, but a few people may be asking, like Rob here on YouTube, how much compo would we be prepared to sort of pay for the right candidate in work? Clearly, obviously, after they got stung by JHT, but Liam Manning worked in the Championship, knows Norwich a little bit, maybe makes a little bit more sense than JHT.
Yeah, I mean, on that conversation point, wouldn't want to put a figure to it, but sort of draw a parallel with what Ben reiterated last week, where if they identify the right players in their view in terms of that high ceiling resale value potential, I'm thinking obviously Cernak and Jurasek, we won't get into the here and now assessing them, but in terms of players who they feel will go on to fulfil potential, they were very happy to put their hands in their pocket collectively with the backing of Mark Atanasio and Norfolk Holdings. To me, it's the same parallel in terms of if they identify the right candidate who's in work and they need to pay compensation, that won't be why a potential deal would fall down. So what figure? I don't know. I'm not quite sure. Sort of figures when you come into managerial compensation. I think Manning's got a year or two left, and there was talk, wasn't there, about him maybe getting a new deal off the back of getting Bristol into the top six. So whether that all flows into it, whether there's break clauses in these individuals' contracts like are with players. Yeah, I mean, just breaking off there to take Dan's point, I guess only remotely from what we sense, and Connor alluded to it, if there isn't that alignment, and there was a lot of talk about Johannes and the upper echelons of the club maybe became disconnected in terms of their viewpoint. But if that is the case and that the Bristol ownership have one view of where they go this summer, where they went last January, I think there was that stat, wasn't there, that Manning used the fewest amount of players in the second part of the season. I don't think he was overly happy with what they did in January. If he doesn't feel he's getting backed, I'm just hypothesising, but maybe that might be a factor because obviously there's a body of work there. I'm sure he'd like to continue to get that team into the top six and to take Connor's point and bring it back round to what you asked me, Adam. Yeah, for me, he, by common consent, has done an unbelievable job there because when I saw Bristol in both those games this season, you didn't look at any of their players and think I'd change them out for any of the Norwich players in terms of player for player. So it comes down to me to the coaching and how he maximised what he had at his disposal to get them into the top six. Maybe, if we're being honest, it underlines again what relatively poor division it was. The fact that Norwich, for all their travails, were still start of February realistically in the top six conversation. So maybe there's an element of that below the top 3 or 4, it was a very average division. But you still, I think, have to acknowledge that he did a tremendous job with a group of players who probably overperformed, and that rests with the coach. So there's a lot to like in terms of a link to him, I'm sure. But as I say, I don't think at this stage, we can be nailing our colours to the mast of any one individual. It feels from everything you hear and speak to the relevant individuals that they're still not quite decided, who they're. I'm sure, but having said that, if you draw a parallel with the Johannes search, Johannes, many months prior to his actual unveiling, was their preferred candidate. Now, I'm pretty sure Ben Knapper has a preferred candidate, but it's one thing having a preferred candidate. It's another maybe convincing that candidate to come, maybe leave where they are now. Maybe if it's an overseas option, maybe come from abroad. bear in mind they will have quite clearly seen what happened to Johannes, and that hasn't worked out. You're once bitten, twice shy if you're a prospective overseas coach looking at Norwich, what they're trying to do here. So while Norwich may, by this stage, have identified who they would like, I still think there's a lot in play here before we're actually, as I say, down at Carrow Road for a presser unveiling, and certainly not any time in the next week or so.
Can I just jump in there, Adam, and add to Paddy's points there, which were excellent, is that I think timing is a big thing as well. We kind of say if you're a domestic manager, much like Johannes Hoff Thorup last summer, who, as we said, they were speaking to long before obviously that appointment was made. Sometimes you have to wait for seasons to end, and if you're a candidate from abroad, there maybe will be a want to see a season out. And I think I'm trying to get my dates exactly right, so you boys jump in if I get this wrong, but I'm pretty sure Johannes managed the final Norwich game on a Sunday, and then that began to escalate by about the Tuesday, Wednesday. So it was quite a quick turnaround after the season, but it was just a case of kind of waiting for that to line up. And during that process, Norwich would, I think it was Will Still and Pascal Janssen, wasn't it? They were speaking to as well, plus others. So sometimes it's about timing, and you have to wait for things to align. Equally, let's use Liam Manning as an example, purely for this exercise. Again, just to prevent people jumping on it, but. Let's take him. His season finished earlier this week. I think he was pretty clear after that game he needed a holiday. I'm sure he probably at that stage doesn't want to be speaking about anything probably football related for the next week or so. So again, there's a timing element to all of these candidates who are in work, and that probably extends why this search maybe is where it's at, and also why maybe some of those out of the work people are being pushed at this stage, because you can get a lot further with those guys a lot quicker than you can the people in work, as Paddy quite rightly said.
Indeed, yeah. A few people maybe throwing different names in. Clearly none of these have been linked, just to caveat that exact same point. But someone saying Massinio off Pompey, Alfie saying Muslich at Plymouth. The interesting one I was going to ask you about, Connor, clearly a few people were sort of linking Brian Prisk, intriguing opportunity in England. Could it be Norwich? Clearly data is a key sort of driving point for him and Norwich, as we know now, moving forward under Atanasio, under Ben Knapper, and even previously really have always been quite data driven. So what do you make of him, I suppose, as a potential candidate?
Yeah, very strong one. I did a piece earlier in the week about it was 5 foreign options basically. Again, I used the criteria that you can go and read that. That's on pinkin.com. Again, it's purely opinion based, speculative. If you don't like that stuff, then leave it well alone. It's not for you. But there's basically 4 names in there. Plus, I added Lijnders after the reports that were added. But essentially, my criteria for that were style of play. So managers who have a high percentage of possession, development of young players, and who had managerial kind of experience or enough a decent body of it at least. And he was one of the names actually that I considered for that list, but didn't put him on it purely because I kind of felt that he probably would view his next job as being a little bit higher than Norwich. If I'm completely honest, you look at the work that he did, particularly at Sparta Prague, where he was excellent. Obviously, got a move to Feyenoord off the back of that. He was Arne Slot's replacement there after he went to Liverpool. Didn't quite work for him, although I think he still won. I think he lost 8 games during his time there from 33. So it was by no means disastrous, but clearly the expectations at that club are significantly higher. And ultimately got replaced, I think, by Robin van Persie, who was seen at that stage as one of the hottest young properties in Dutch football. So I think there was probably, again, a combination of maybe him not quite doing enough, but also Van Persie being a very attractive candidate who obviously has connections with Feyenoord as well. So I think probably those things done it for him. That being said, you look at his career and where he's worked. I think Midtjylland is one as well. He's worked at Royal Antwerp in Belgium. A lot of clubs there that are kind of in the Stats Bomb group or use Stats Bomb, and he's quite good at twofold, really maximising clubs who have sort of minimal resources. You look at some of his European performances over his tenure have been very impressive. Equally that style of play point is really strong, but he tends to be quite selective over the jobs he picks. So he would be a very, very good candidate if there was any interest from him. And this is, I would imagine, what it would come down to of coming to Norwich. Could I see him in the Championship? I've got to be completely honest, not at Norwich's level. at a Southampton, Leicester kind of level potentially. That's not to say he wouldn't be interested or he isn't interested. That's just kind of where I viewed things earlier in the week when I looked at him as a name. But yeah, without doubt, clearly a very, very talented coach. And that's before we go down kind of the route of, well, would they go for a Danish coach again and all the optics of that? But ultimately, if it's the right candidate, then I think you would. So yeah, if he was interested, I think he'd be a very strong candidate. But again, I think that's a big caveat. And clearly some of the jobs that he's getting linked to abroad, is it AK Athens that he's getting linked to? I think again, European football, that's a strong job, I would say, for him at this stage. I'm sure he will have some very good options. So yeah, we'll wait and see on that one. But yeah, no suggestion at this stage that it is Norwich or will be Norwich or he's spoken to Norwich or hasn't spoken to Norwich. But I can see why people have maybe done their research into him and are quite attracted to what he would bring, because it feels like a lot of kind of what he represents does align with where Norwich City are at this moment in time.
Indeed, yeah. A few people may be asking questions about those that have been ruled out, Paddy. Darren on YouTube saying, I'd like to know why Russell isn't on the list, ticks all the boxes. And then a few people asking about Jack Wilshere and maybe has he left the building? Is he still at Norwich? So where are we at with that?
Well, on Jack Wilshere, no, he's still under contract because effectively that's what he joined as, a first-team coach on a contract. So interestingly, I've not really seen, despite the plethora of job vacancies opening up, I've not really seen him touted in any circles, really, betting or otherwise. So a little bit surprised about that, because he's made it quite clear, you know, if it's not to be here, then he wants to be a head coach. I think your man Ornstein, didn't he, tweeted within decent haste after the decision was communicated from Ben Knapper via us that he wasn't going to go with Jack through this process. But off the back of what he said very openly and honestly in that 2-game window, he wanted to now strike out. He feels ready to be a head coach. So in the here and now, no, he hasn't left the building. He's still part of, but effectively, as we know, all the players have scattered, apart from the ones who are still at Colney doing rehab, like Krizeni and Jurasek. Likewise, the backroom staff, we're now in this kind of Dubai-esque holiday season. If you go on social media and you see all the players off there, I think I saw Nunes with an eagle on his arm. I don't know if anybody saw that. So don't know why that randomly popped into my head. But so I guess I would imagine Jack and his family are off somewhere, chilling out, relaxing, recharging the batteries. And as it stands, in the here and now, he's a Norwich City employee and will remain so. They're due back for pre-season training, 3rd week of June. I'll be surprised if he is in the building. But, of course, what needs to happen is between now and then, if it is to be a head coach opportunity, then the club have to come to Norwich. Kind of the reverse of what we just discussed in the last section. Approach an individual who's under contract, and if there is something that Jack wants to go and explore and there is an opportunity to go and be a head coach somewhere else, then it'll be a compensation deal. And if you're Norwich, obviously, you know, you've got an individual who's under contract, a little bit like, draw a parallel, Narcis Pelac. You know, when he went to Stoke had to approach Norwich. There had to be a compensation package before he was released. It'll be the same with Wilshere. It's not going to be a shake hands and thanks for all you've done, Jack. There'll only be one of 2 scenarios Jack Wilshere leaves, and that's either he gets an opportunity and compensation's paid, or maybe he comes to a mutual termination of his contract. But neither of those things have happened as of yet. And then your other point, Adam, on Russell, I am surprised for reasons already stated. You know, even parking anything to do with Norwich, whether he's now Uber Norwich or he's no longer Uber Norwich. He's a coach who, with a very clear playing philosophy that was very robust in the Championship, has got a team out of the Championship into the Premier League. We know, a bit like Daniel previously at Norwich, it didn't go as planned, and he paid for that with his job. But he's still, of the available candidates for me, well, not that my view has any bearing on anything that Ben Knapper's thinking about, but it does seem strange, I've got to be honest, because the pedigree is there as a coach. You know, I think would be a very good fit. But why? Well, Ben Knapper could answer that. You know, is it? I don't know. Is there a dynamic where Russ would want, I don't know, hypothetically, more say in terms of the football strategy than maybe Ben Knapper is envisaging is that he had with Johannes? It's very hard to say why they deemed Russell Martin wasn't worthy of not even picking up the phone to have a conversation. Where you at? would you consider, if we put you into this process? There was none of that. And I know for a fact, having had dialogue with Russell's camp, that they're very disappointed, him and Gilly, that didn't even take place. That's not to say they would have, said, yes, please, we'd love to be Norwich's new head coach and assistant. But I think they would have expected a conversation. And I think I would have expected a conversation as well. So why? We can only hypothesise. But certainly on the evidence of the available runners and riders, it does seem a strange one, yeah. I mean, yeah, Craig's point there, maybe there might be something in the footballing template of Russell Martin that doesn't really chime with Ben Knapper. But I just remember, and we can all remember, when they came to Carrow Road under David Wagner, and albeit Norwich got a result that day, but they did it with like 19% possession. I know which of those two brands of football I would rather see, and lest we forget, it got them all the way to Wembley, where they saw off Daniel Farke's Leeds. No mean feat. So. That for me would have been well worth at least exploring it, And if it didn't come to pass, if Russell's maybe got other opportunities that he deems are a better fit, he's spoken, hasn't he? He's done lots of media over the summer and said he's turned down job opportunities. So, it might not have been for him, but not to actually have an exploratory conversation around it does seem strange, yeah.
Indeed, yeah. A few questions coming in that we can maybe go into. Anthony saying, could we be looking to get Lijnders in as a first-team coach working under a more established and experienced manager/head coach? I mean, Colin, we did speak a little bit about this last week. It feels probably that whoever they do go with will probably bring their own people this time around.
Yeah, I think you'd want that, wouldn't you? Probably more so than Johannes Hoff Thorup did, and obviously he, and we've spoken about this before, came in with people he hadn't, well, only Glenn first and foremost, but even Glenn he hadn't worked with before prior to arriving at Norwich City. And I think in the end that probably is, and he reflected on it a little bit in that Tip Blizzett interview, that he probably would do differently, because not only having to implement the style of play, you're obviously having to teach that to players, but also coaches how to implement. And if you don't have that kind of plug-in, ready to go stuff from the coaching side, it doesn't half leave you with a lot to do. And I think we probably saw how much that was the case. As for Pep Lijnders, I think he's got enough of a CV, and was it over 480 games he was assistant to Jurgen Klopp for, obviously being a head coach now in his own right. He's getting linked with head coach jobs. I think at this stage for him to go in, not even as a number 2, but as a number 3, that would feel extremely unlikely. I would say that's clearly a man who feels he's good enough and ready to be a head coach in his own right. So yeah, I would discount that. But equally, like Paddy says, Norwich have one at the moment, and that's Jack Wilshere. And until that situation gets resolved, they aren't looking for one. Now, clearly, as was the case with Narcis Palash, and we know, I think we broke the Wilshere story. What was it, before Christmas time? We know from that search they spoke to, I think there were links with a Danish coach, wasn't there? There was definitely one overseas who had connections to Ben Knapper that they were speaking to as well. So that was a kind of multi-candidate process at that time. And at this stage, we know that they'll have options and be eyeing up options who could potentially step into that role should obviously Jack depart through one of the two routes that Paddy explained. So I think it's. I don't think it'll be him, but clearly I would personally be shocked if they started the season and Jack Wilshere was still in that role. But I think it would either be, as you say, head coach led in terms of somebody that they've worked with before, or it would be somebody that clearly Ben Knapper's got connections to and rates very highly. And I'm sure both of those things will be put on the table, because let's take Gary O'Neill for example. He's got a pretty extensive background team that he had at Wolves. I mean, to name but 4, I think Ian Jenkins was his assistant manager, who he worked with at Liverpool. Ian Birchnell, who was Notts County manager for a little while, was a first team coach. Sean Derry as well. So there's already sort of 3 members of staff alongside just him. So largely probably is head coach dependent, but I'm sure if it is just a head coach and assistant that comes in, then the club will have options ready to go in terms of that first team coach spot, should obviously Jack Wilshere depart, which hasn't happened yet.
Yes, Adam on YouTube saying, do you think Norwich are an attractive proposition under FFP pressure, losing best players and a fan base that quickly turns on managers? I mean, Ben Knapper was pretty keen to intimate, Paddy, that he feels Norwich are an attractive, proposition as a football club. You look at kind of their championship record, the fact they sell out every week, and some of the players they've got in terms of talent pool. So, what do you sort of make of Norwich being attractive, I suppose, for proposition managers?
It's an interesting one, Adam. I mean, what I would say is that, and we've seen it at Sunderland, the perfect case in point. To be fair, Norwich, if you go back to Farke's first season, what was it, 14th, 15th, and then they did what they did. it can change very quickly in this league, probably because it's a lot of averageness and doesn't take much to rise above that. But, a head coach, coaching staff, group of players can come together, even though in the here and now you look at it, you think there's a hell of a lot of work to do. And some of those points have just come through there about, to be fair, I put that one to Ben Knapper. You lose Sargent, you lose Nunes, you lose Science. Does that scream we're building a squad to build on seasoned, proven championship players to get us up and around the top 6 and in it, which we know is the benchmark? Ben Knapper reiterated that. Whoever's in charge at Norwich, they will always, in the championship, need to be targeting the top 6. So I think it can change quickly. Is it an attractive proposition? Well, if you can convince that, you've got that stability with the ownership, which they clearly have now. They've got the financial wherewithal, which they have now. You can argue, obviously, in the here and now that the squad isn't good enough, but I think we'd all agree there's sufficient optimism in terms of some of those younger players who could, with the right senior players around them, kick on again. We look at the initial impact Jacob Wright has done. He will be confirmed as Norwich's player probably early next week now. You continue to have that level of young player in the next window or two, then it's not beyond the realm. So yeah, I think if you're whether you're an out-work head coach or you're one who's maybe looking at Norwich, you would think, yeah, that is not the worst scenario to be handed in terms of the club, the ownership, the playing material. Of course, there's lots of work to do this summer. We know that in terms of the squad, but I still think there's enough there. And it's worth reiterating, it wasn't many games from the end of the season that they were really on the cusp of that top 6 and just blew it. And we know there's many reasons why it just tailed off so alarmingly. But 2/3, 3/4 of the way into a season, that group of players was still good enough to be in and around it. It doesn't feel to me it would take a huge amount of tweaking from a head coach who is able to galvanise and some of the points made there. Get that hunger back into the group. All the things that Jack talked about in his 2 games in charge. Those intangibles, which we did see in those 2 games, to be honest, because I think there is talent in this group of players. But of course, we're sat here at the start of a summer window where they still have Sargent and Nunes in the building. You lose 2 or more of those, it feels a bigger challenge, certainly. So, yeah, but is Norwich an attractive proposition? I guess it depends what other options you've got in play. If you're a Gary O'Neill, hypothetically, and you see the Leicester job out and about, you see, I don't know, maybe even West Brom to a degree, you might look at certainly a Leicester and feel that's a better opportunity, a better vehicle as a head coach to get yourself back to the Premier League in quicker time than Norwich, that's for sure. So I guess it comes down to where the prospective head coaches they approach are at in terms of their careers and where they feel they need to get to in short order. If it's a more mid to longer term process, then maybe, but then that's what was sold to JHT, and within 10, 11 months he was out the door, wasn't he? So, but yeah, I know it's easy to get too introspective and too much navel gazing about everything is doom and gloom here, but I don't think that's necessarily the case, because history tells you in recent history with Norwich City that it can turn again. And Sunderland, as I say, proved within the space of two seasons what is possible. They're now 1 game away from the Premier League. Who would have said that when they finished bottom half of the table last season?
Indeed, yeah. A few other comments around the head coach stuff, which we'll just quickly delve into. Lee saying, "Hi guys, what of the candidates last time round? Like, will still, for example, Pascal Janssen, I suppose, would they be in the frame of talk on it?"
Well, Will Still is at Lon and doing a pretty good job there by all accounts. So I think he's probably okay. I don't think he's in the place he was last summer where he didn't have a job and was considering his options by all accounts. And so, yeah, I think where Norwich are at, where he's at in his career, he's probably just a little bit ahead of Norwich at the moment. And Pascal Janssen, I believe, is in the MLS, isn't he, with New York City? I think he went there via Hungary and seems to be doing a very good job. So yeah, never say never. I think Pascal Janssen clearly has an excellent reputation in terms of developing young players, which he did at AZ Alkmaar. So that was the appeal of him. I think Will Still was maybe seen as a little bit of a sort of go-between option in terms of style of play. Maybe wasn't as idealistic, and you've seen that from some of the appearances that he's done in various places. But and even that, we spoke earlier about maybe the names that have been put out there already. I wouldn't necessarily say those 3 Thorup, Still, Janssen are completely aligned in terms of everything that they had to offer. You pick 3 candidates that maybe have some of the qualities and all of the qualities, and then you pick one that you feel is closest to what you want. And last summer that was Johannes Hoff Thorup of the 3, and was before they'd even decided on that 3. So I don't think either of those again, could be famous last words. It's an opinion, but I don't get the sense that either of those will be in the running this time around, because they're both in work and both doing pretty well in the jobs they've got. I think Will Still probably would now have his eye on maybe a bigger Championship job / Premier League job now for what he's doing in Ligue 1, which is certainly from the outside looking in very impressive. And obviously, I've seen a few comments about Liam Rosenior as well. Well, that's someone who's going to be managing Champions League football next season. So he's not coming back to the Championship, and he's not coming to a team that finished in the bottom half of the Championship either, I would say. So yeah, I'd put a line through his name as well.
Yes, maybe slightly veering away from Norwich's head coach search. Paddy, what do you make of Johannes Hoff Thorup to QPR, and maybe that situation that's unfolded a little bit this week?
Well, I think it's safe to say he has spoken to them. I saw this morning they might have 5 on their list. And it feels like, externally looking at it, maybe Tom Cleverley is leading that charge. But yeah, funny enough, I was talking to somebody inside Norwich this morning, and they could see it. They could see him, and they could see Glenn putting the band back together there as well. Glenn did that media midweek, said ideally he wants another challenge abroad. Despite how it ended here, despite the lessons they needed to learn, I think I could see those 2 reunited, and I wouldn't rule it out. But it doesn't feel like he's maybe the leading candidate from everything you hear. But as I said to this individual, guaranteed fixtures drop, first game of the season, QPR away. Hello, Glenn. Hello, Johannes. So watch this space. But it will be on a broader level. It will be interesting to see where they do pitch up. Whether a club in the Championship liked enough of what they saw from Johannes that they're willing to give him a chance. And then if he gets in at Championship level again, I'm sure there will be many areas of how he managed here that he would do differently. But I think we'd all agree when it was good, when Hoffball was good, it was good. So, not good enough, clearly, but if it's not QPR, I wouldn't be surprised at all if it's England. Yeah.
Yes, a few other people throwing names in the fold. Mark Robbins at Stoke, I've seen Cifuentes and Chandler at Stockport, Craig Bellamy of course now manager of Wales, Cesc Fabregas now coming in from Christopher. So a few people maybe throwing their names into the hat. Shaney on YouTube saying, do we expect the new head coach to be in post before the squad head out to the Netherlands in pre-season, Connor?
If that isn't the case, then something's gone badly wrong along the way. So yes, that is our expectation. Obviously, there's been that announcement today, hasn't they? From, I've completely forgotten the club, so one of you lads might have to remind me. But from the Dutch club who've just got promoted and just won the second tier, that they are going. There you go. Who I looked through their squad earlier. I've got Vernon Anita playing for them, which is a kind of former Premier League midfielder at Newcastle, if you remember him. But that will be, and we're hoping to be out there, and we expect we will be out there. That will be kind of the first public sighting that we get of whoever the new head coach is, because the first friendly game is behind closed doors against Northampton at Colney, and isn't going to be open for supporters to go and watch. The games in Holland are, and there obviously will be some there, and that will be obviously the first sighting that we get of them and how they act and how their team looks at that very, very early stage. So the expectation is they'll be in a post well in advance of then. Paddy kind of outlined right at the beginning the timeline. I think we're probably looking at least another week, but that would take us towards the end of May, wouldn't it? Which players aren't back until late June. So yeah, they've got plenty of time to play with. And yeah, the search has been long, but it's not going to be that long that we're sat here waiting in 2 months, I think that is. So let's hope that's not the case.
Yes, Dan saying that FC Volendam, random fact for you, that the Dutch club who have yo-yoed the most. So there we go. That's probably the
yo-yo derby.
Game. There we go. Fitting game for both. I think we've spoken around managers for quite a while. So maybe for the last 10 minutes, we'll delve into other news that Norwich have maybe communicated this week, or maybe it hasn't been communicated this week, but might be communicated very shortly. Joe saying, hi, Paddy, Connor and Adam. I hope you're all well. Do you know if Jacob Wright has signed up permanently for Norwich yet? Fabrizio Romano, the sort of well-renowned sports journalist, reporting this week, Paddy, that Jacob Wright to Norwich is all sealed and done. So where are we at in terms of that deal?
Well, he's not technically accurate to say it is completely done, but I mean, it is done. Yeah, it is done. But I think we're at the end game where it's liaising with Man City in this case to agree on mutual release times, maybe some of the contractual I's and T's. But I mean, is it a revelation? We don't need here we go from that man, do we? I mean, Ben Knapper said on our touch point when I asked him with a big smile on his face that, that was a deal they hope to conclude, meaning that deal will be concluded because there's no doubt for the money, again, which I think we were the first media to put that figure out. Correct me if I'm wrong. So maybe we do know what we're talking about occasionally, but 2.3 with add-ons is, well, I know it's a small sample, but that looks as an absolute steal. You know, a pedigree of a player who's been in at Man City, learnt his trade the right way. It was interesting. You know, we're not breaching any confidences, but in the off-the-record bit with Ben Knapper, he was talking just about how he carries himself around Colney and that leadership for, a 19-year-old. Even before they go out to warm up, you know, anecdotes about the professionalism that the stretching element, just those little things that I'm sure good habits that he's learned being in and around Guardiola and that first team group, and just a desire to get better and improve himself. And that's not a bad way to kick off your summer transfer window by bringing in / confirming a permanent deal for that man. And I think that's going to probably frame a lot of what they're trying to do from here on in now in terms of the deals they go for. I'm not saying they're only going to go for teenagers who are attached to big clubs like Man City, but in terms of quality technically, but also characters. I mean, we heard that around Makonga when he came in the building from Brighton, that he was a real leader in his character as much as his talent and his ability. And that's very much the type of player they want to attract. And you get enough of them, populating your squad with enough of them, you would hope that can take you to where you want to get to. So, yeah, I think when I checked this morning, it was kind of probably tipping towards the early part of next week before official confirmation. But, you know, do not be afraid. Jacob Wright will be in green and yellow next season.
Yes, indeed. We also had the retained list that came out this week, Connor, and maybe those that will be in the building and who won't. Maybe no real shocks. We obviously knew about the sort of Gunn Hernandez, Sorensen, situation. A few academy lads going. A few people saying, Kevin on YouTube saying, what do we make of our friend Jonathan Rowe no longer being here? Ben as well saying, have we got Lewis Dobbin back in the building yet? Well, both of those are obviously on that list. You know, Jonathan Rowe's deal that I think we all knew was going through anyway. It was an obligation to buy unless Marseille got relegated. So that's all done and dusted. And Lewis Dobbin, it says talk's still ongoing. So maybe where are we at with that? And maybe the retained list. Any shocks, I suppose, on there for you?
Yeah. Like you say, on Rowe, that's been basically done since last summer, hasn't it? In all but name. Again, this is not anything new that we haven't reported in previously, but there was never any option for that to be broken beyond Marseille going down. I think talk of maybe, like the Jadon Sancho deal, like a severance fee almost of that agreement was just a non-starter. Why would Norwich City take £5 million? And the player back when you can get 14 for him, when, obviously everything that kicked off, he's out of contract technically at Norwich City this summer as well. So that just would not make sense in any realm for me. So really good bit of business. I think the fee that they've got for him, I think it's 14 rising to 17, isn't it? With a decent sell on as well. Clearly hasn't gone the way he would have liked at Marseille, but I think clearly someone that's got a talent, and we've spoken enough about that situation last summer. It's a shame how it ended for him. It shouldn't have ended in that way. Going to be really interesting to see what happens with him now this summer, and whether Marseille elect to keep him ahead of next season, or whether maybe there's a return to England. Lewis Dobbin, interesting one. Clearly there are talks ongoing, and he's somebody that Norwich are exploring the possibility of coming back. What's interesting for me would be kind of the injury record around him, and it's maybe one I'll put in the room for you boys really, but you look at obviously that calf injury, and sort of the intimation is that that's maybe taken a little bit longer than they felt. Obviously, we knew he was going to be out until the end of the season. But you look at his history throughout his career, there's been Achilles injuries and little bits and bobs. And given obviously the narrative that's formed at Norwich City, do you go for him again? If you could, let's say, hypothetically, there was another domestic winger that you could do on loan that maybe offered what Lewis Dobbin offered, but had a better injury record. I don't know. Maybe I'll open this to Paddy and to you, Adam. Would you go down that route? Would you go back for Dobbin? Because as good as he was, it was only 2 goals in 10 games. We can obviously debate the impact. I thought he did make a good impact, but I don't know. Do you take that risk again over a full season? If I was Norwich, I think I'd be weighing that up.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting one. Obviously, you look at kind of, I suppose the fact they've got a full summer now to try and do some work, unlike maybe Cade Gordon, where it was kind of, last minute, we need to try and get someone over the line here. It feels like they've got enough time to try and do that. I mean, Ben saying Poku is a free agent at Peterborough. I think it's being linked with Birmingham by all accounts, and maybe a few other clubs. Clearly, he's available on a free. Maybe that kind of profile of young player who's doing well in League One that, you could potentially try and prize away and bring into the Championship maybe is an interesting route. So yeah, clearly, I suppose going to be an interesting summer in terms of that. Jedi Canary saying, heard on radio this morning, Brian Gunn said Norwich need to sign at least 8 players in the summer to be competitive again. Will the head coach need to be one that can attract players? I suppose interesting sort of point there, Paddy. And clearly Ben Knapper does a lot of the transfer dealings, but the head coach will probably have some sort of say within that. So maybe I suppose sooner rather than later trying to get someone in the building to sort of maybe I suppose have a little bit of influence on who they bring in.
Well, I mean, 2 things I'd say there, Adam. Maybe again, hypothetically, there's a head coach who they've approached. He's looking at that and he's thinking, this isn't a 1-season turnaround job. This is a big body of work in terms of the squad to get them to be competitive, be that top 6 contending team. That could put off potential candidates who maybe it doesn't align with where they feel they are in their coaching career. But the second point is, that you're right. When Johannes came in last summer, I remember when we did Lee Dunn interview, the head of recruitment, and he said it was quite a handbrake in terms of, they had to sit down with him, feed in what type of profile of player he wanted into their recruitment. And obviously, the sooner you do that going into the summer, the quicker, because also in that Lee Dunn interview, he made it clear that a player like Callum Doyle, they'd followed him for months and months in advance. That's the length of time, the lead into a lot of these deals. What you don't want is to be almost waiting for the new incumbent to then feed in their little nuances and tweaks to the recruitment. So certainly on that particular strand, the sooner the new individuals in the building, the quicker, because they will inevitably, you're right, want to have an input into shaping this summer's recruitment.
Yes, indeed. Before maybe just talk slightly about pre-season, Connor. Obviously, Flo Allen, me and Sam went down and spoke to her earlier this week. Obviously, good news there on the women's front. They're now going to start paying some players. Clearly, they can attract then some more players to the club to try and aim for that promotion. Good news for the football club.
Yeah, absolutely, and long overdue. Let's be honest. A team of Norwich City stature, who obviously are where they are, clearly there's a process, and they've wanted to do it organically. But I think it's a really positive step for where they are at this moment in time. It's a club that needs to get promoted now. They've had a couple of cracks at it, obviously progressed in terms of getting a lot closer to that title, but it's such a ruthless system where obviously only one team gets promoted. That feels wrong to me. That's the way it works. There should be obviously more than that, and hopefully with that extra investment, it will be the difference between them finishing second, as they have done for 2 seasons in a row, and obviously taking that step to get into the 3rd tier, which obviously then would open up a lot of different possibilities and solutions for them. So yeah, really good step. Hopefully keep some of those younger players here. I mean, Eloise Moran is an exceptional talent when I've watched her play. As one example, she's one that you would expect to be in that sort of conversation around keeping, but also it's the possibility of then attracting players with probably a wider range. You look at maybe Suffolk, Essex, other neighbouring counties. You could potentially attract players from those areas to come and play for Norwich City women, which previously wasn't the case. So yeah, that's undoubtedly a really good step for the club. And obviously what it does now is increases the pressure on all of them to try and get out of that division and to try and start to make progress up the leagues, which is ultimately what needs to be done to ensure that their progress continues to be linear as it has been on the whole.
Yes, and to round off, obviously we had the pre-season sort of plans were communicated. Paddy, going to be one behind closed doors game at Colney against Northampton, a couple of games in Holland in the Zeeland area, and also Carrow Road friendly against NAC Breda on the 2nd of August. So clearly good news to now have that information out there for fans. And Dan asking, to lighten the mood, here is a fun debate with pre-season friendlies coming up. You have 6 games to arrange, 2 at home, 4 away, and a training camp. Who are you choosing and what country? I suppose putting you on the spot a little bit. Oh, there we go. Paddy's gone. So you'll have to answer that, Connor.
Tells you what you thought of that question, didn't it? That's a good question. 2 at home, 4 away. Who am I choosing? I'm trying to think of places that we've been. I really liked where we were last year, Austria, in terms of the scenery and the place. That was really nice. So I'll go there for a training camp. And I always think you want like the bigger clubs, the better, really. I'd love to see Ajax in a friendly again. We had Inter Milan at Carrow Road, didn't we? So those two for the Carrow Road friendlies, I think would be great. Austrian camp, you could have like a Salzburg, and maybe one of the German teams. You might have to help me with who's around that border, Adam. You're a bit better at geography than me. Maybe one of the big German clubs could come across.
Stuttgart or Munich, someone like that. There.
Yeah, well, there you go. You've got to go with Munich, haven't you? And then the other two, I'd quite like at some stage a nice trip to the States. Maybe there could be a reunion with Dean Smith and Charlotte FC. That would be good fun. And then if you were over there, you could do like an Inter Miami and get to see Messi, something like that. I think that would be a pretty good pre-season. Also, quite expensive though, I think, for Norwich fans.
Yeah, I'm sort of always felt that Spain's somewhere I want to see, or Portugal maybe. I quite like the look of, is it Braga that have got that rock? I think it might be Braga that have got the rock stadium. That's something that has always kind of intrigued me and enticed me, and it's sort of an area that Norwich have not typically gone into. So maybe somewhere like that. We've brought Paddy back. I don't know if you caught that, Paddy, but where would your ideal pre-season, I suppose, camp away from home be?
We had was it you, Adam? You put in about Wrexham are going to New Zealand and Australia. Yeah, I fancy a bit of that. Yeah. Could see you, Connor, riding a kangaroo or something like
that. Hugging a koala or something, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I could see that. Yeah. Well, I mean, I was fortunate way back in the day now to do the America trip with the Chris Hughton squad, 2013, I think. So that was an experience, yeah. So you don't need to go anywhere when you've got Norfolk on your doorstep, boys. We'll go play in Cromer or something like that.
Wells next to sea. That's a nice ground, isn't it? Across on that walk up to the seafront, yeah.
Yes, indeed. One late question from Adam that maybe is intriguing, saying, does the Atanasio involvement with Benfica mean that Norwich are likely to become their feeder club? Only sort of 5% and part of a wider group, Paddy, but what do you sort of make of that news that he's maybe expanding his portfolio?
To be fair, Adam, I think Connor was all over that story yesterday. He might be better. You pitch in there, Connor. You were all over that yesterday, weren't you?
Yeah, again, it's as these stories always are. They're complex. So as you said, it's 5% of a wider group that hasn't been officially ratified yet, according to reports in Portugal. And I think there's maybe a little bit of to and froing if those reports are to be believed. They're not ones that, again, at this stage we verified ourselves, but that is certainly what those reports are saying. So 5% in their statement, they said they're not involved or looking to get involved in terms of sporting decisions. So that's sporting decisions in football decisions, not sporting as in Sporting Lisbon. So yeah, I think at this stage it'd be very premature to be talking about anything like that. I think at this stage it's clearly one that has been spoken about for a while. So was it a huge shock to see? Not really. And like you say, it's part of a wider group. I think there's I can't remember the chap's name now, but someone who used to invest in Nice. There's Jean-Paul Chappers, who's part of the Crescent Capital Group as well, that Atanasio co-owns. So yeah, it's as a group 5%. I would say it's probably one to keep an eye on, but I don't think it will shift the kind of tectonic plates of where Norwich are at this moment in time.
Yeah, we've been going for sort of just over an hour, so unless you boys got any other business that we've missed, then I think we can probably wrap it up this lunchtime. Of course, thanks for all your comments and interactions over the last hour or so. Of course, this search will inevitably go on for a little bit longer, so we'll be across that on the Pink and channels. You could take out a subscription, $2.99 a month. We'll also be at pre-season as well, as the boys have alluded to and we've spoken around, so definitely keep it locked to our channels for all the coverage this summer. We'll have all the podcasts and everything else, all the transfer news. We'll be across it all, so no better place to be this summer than with us. Of course, thanks for all your support on YouTube over the recent weeks as well. I think we're closing on 11,000 subscribers. So if you're not already subscribed and you're watching this, then go down and hit that subscribe button. With that, I think we're going to sign off. Enjoy your weekend, whatever you're getting up to. And of course, hopefully moving into next week, there might be some more positive news on the Norwich City front.